All right, good morning, good evening, good night. It's another episode of the Layer 1 podcast. We are bringing you the latest from around the crypto industry, bringing you some good information, great projects, great founders and co-founders. I have myself, Jesse Morris, here. He is the Chief Commercial Officer for Energy Web, a project that is tackling renewable energy, carbon emissions. You guys are doing a lot of awesome things. You got a $1 million grant from Google. You're working with Volkswagen. Too many things to wrap my head around. But my man, Jesse, how are you doing today?
I am doing awesome and really excited to be here and talk about everything you just riffed through and more.
Awesome, man. Well, we had API 3 on the podcast last week. I was a little bit out of my depth with oracles and APIs, and I will be, again, out of my depth with renewable energy, carbon footprints, and things like this as it relates to crypto and Bitcoin and all that stuff. But I think this is an awesomely timed interview here. We had Elon come out recently in the past couple of weeks and absolutely trash the market, basically, with his comments on renewable energy as it relates to proof-of-work systems and Bitcoin. So I'll just throw this out there right away. Was Elon right about his comments on renewable energy?
So he's, let's not like dodge the subject around Bitcoin in particular. Bitcoin uses a lot of electricity. And unfortunately, grids around the world, right, they're not running on 100% renewables yet. So definitely it's a challenge that needs to be overcome. He also knew that. He's known it for some time. So I think the timing was a bit odd. And especially if we check out what happened a couple of days ago, coming back with him and Saylor talking about, well, maybe there's a way to solve this problem. But I think at its fundamentals, definitely Bitcoin, because of the choice of the community to really stick with proof of work. Yeah, we got a challenge to overcome. I think the thing that the media is missing out a little bit on the coverage, and we can get into this, is crypto is being uniquely singled out here, right, in terms of carbon emissions. If we look at any of these technology-focused industries, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, like you name it, they all use a massive amount of electricity. And so what's going on here is you have a specific industry that's being called out by Elon and others and basically saying, wow, we should think about how much carbon this is pumping out. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I want to dive deep here before we get into what you guys are doing with Energy Web and all the things you guys are doing under that umbrella. Does the actual solution get solved when more scalable options or a move to proof of stake? Does that solution find itself there when maybe Bitcoin kind of finds a scaling solution or we move to these proof of stake systems?
Yeah, and so here's the dynamic I'm seeing, and I think everybody in the crypto ecosystem is recognizing this. And I'll just say what maybe is not explicitly being said. More efficient consensus mechanisms reduce the amount of electricity needed to run a blockchain like Bitcoin from that of a medium-sized country to a medium-sized office building. Energy Web chain that we're going to talk about. It's a proof of authority network, a proof of stake network. They just use less electricity. So moving to proof of stake, it doesn't mean that it's 100% renewable because the nodes running those blockchains are in different places. It's an energy efficiency play, basically. You dramatically reduce the amount of electricity needed for that. Now, that being said, I am not a fan of the maximalists saying, one consensus mechanism is better than the other. Forget that. Basically, my philosophy, and also just that of Energy Web, and we'll talk about the Crypto Climate Accord, is Bitcoin's here. It's probably not going anywhere. Community doesn't seem interested in changing the consensus mechanism. So let's work with what we've got.
Yeah, let's talk about that Crypto Climate Accord because that kind of is related to what's happening as well. You guys co-founded that initiative and kind of take me through what you're basically looking to accomplish. I know Make Crypto Green is kind of the hashtag there. So how do we go about in the climate that we are in today, pun intended, how do we go about making crypto green so that people feel comfortable using it?
Yeah, before I answer how, because that's really the meat of what we're focused on now. We should tie it right back to what Michael Saylor and Elon were tweeting about yesterday with this Bitcoin Mining Council.
Okay.
But just even today, right? So the context is Energy Web. We make open source software to help the grid just become green. Forget crypto, right? Our mission is literally to just bring blockchain and other open source technologies to market to help accelerate decarbonization. And we'll get into like what that looks like. Because part of our tech stack uses blockchain, we're at this pretty interesting intersection. between crypto and climate and sustainability. So we said, well, wait a minute, we got to do something here. We got to engage on all of this talk about carbon and blockchain technology. And that's really where the Crypto Climate Accord came from. We basically said, can we pull together a critical mass of crypto market participants, exchanges, Bitcoin miners, wallet providers, technology providers, you name it, to sort of say, hey, this is a real problem, let's tackle it. Yep. So that was the first thing, very much consortium building, community building around a shared objective of making crypto totally green. So we've been doing that. We continue to bring companies in. We just signed some additional ones today. But you know, I'm a climate and energy geek, and I've been learning about crypto the past 4 years. And what I'm really interested in more is the how. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, which is, okay, it's pretty easy to explain how a solar panel absorbing, you know, radiation from the sun can translate that into usable green electricity that powers my house. All right. But, you know, with Bitcoin, to take an example, how the hell do you convince a globally decentralized network of market participants, miners, all of the other people to make that kind of decision? Right. So it's, I think, naturally confusing topic, and it's somewhat overwhelming if you start thinking about it like that, right?
Yeah, it's a whole overwhelming subject, and I like that you have that background of being in renewable energy and all these different things before you actually found crypto. Do you remember the moment when you were working in that industry that you still work in today, but now you guys are just adding all these blockchain pieces? Do you remember the moment you were like, I think blockchain could be the answer here?
Oh, yes. I spent about 10 years working at another nonprofit called Rocky Mountain Institute. It's a think tank. And Rocky Mountain Institute's a similar mission to EnergyWeb, all about decarbonization. I spent years sitting in boardrooms with executives from utilities and global energy companies, showing them PowerPoints and spreadsheets about how all these cool low carbon technologies, solar, electric vehicles, controllable IoT devices to turn your hot tub up or down at the right times, how these things could make them a ton of money. And I got a lot of shaking heads, and I got a lot of, oh, very interesting, Mr. Morris, and then nothing would happen. Yeah. And one of the big reasons nothing happened, and this is where blockchain came in, was that these energy companies and just the energy system as a whole around the globe is unbelievably analog. Digital transformation for your run-of-the-mill grid operator or utility that is providing like electricity to everybody listening to this, like Zoom is digital transformation.
Wow.
Right? You switching to some new IT system is a really big deal for these companies that, look, they've been around for over 100 years to just keep the lights on. Very different business than all this crazy blockchain and digital stuff. So to directly answer your question, we were facing challenges about how do you get a bunch of utilities who don't trust each other to conduct business outside of their IT boundaries? How do you get those same utilities to trust that my electric car can charge at a very precise moment in time while completely shielding all of the private information about that car? So a lot of these problems about entities and businesses and individuals transacting across organizational boundaries, that was the problem we were facing in energy. In comes blockchain. Somebody told me about this thing called Ethereum back in 2016. I think it was at like $4 or something like that. I should have dumped everything I had into it, which I didn't.
Same.
Yeah, so that was kind of the genesis. And over time, we've just started pairing blockchain with all these other cool open source decentralized technologies to solve this problem.
Excellent answer there. We're going to dive deep on Energy Web here. I want to give a shout out to everybody in the chat. One of the awesome things about the Layer 1 podcast is we're live here now. We live in existence afterwards on YouTube and then also on any podcasting platform. So I want to give a quick shout out to everybody in the chat. You guys are absolutely rocking it. I think we have some EWT fans here in the house. They're talking about EWT guys, EWT baby, Energy Web to 1K easily. We won't talk on the price, I promise. But we are going to have ourselves an awesome discussion here. And I think we laid the foundation where Elon and Michael say they're going to come up as we talk. But really, again, out of my depth, I think there are some people that want to have an understanding of how all this works. So you laid the foundation. I really want a genesis in a TLDR form of the energy grid system. That almost is too much to comprehend. What is the genesis of that, and what does that look like today, where blockchain can kind of take advantage and make it more efficient?
So I kind of just hinted at it in my last sentence. The past 100 years, or even more than that, like early 1900s, actually, let's even step back. the grid used to be decentralized back at its genesis. If you look at like New York City, and I'm not an expert historian on the grid here, there's a lot of good books and podcasts on this, but my understanding is, again, you had places like New York that had these reciprocating engines that pumped out electricity, and that electricity came from these generators that powered lights locally. So it was this very bottom-up decentralized network of microgrids running on reciprocating engines. What happened is the government and all these other market participants were like, wait a minute, economies of scale. Let's dump billions of dollars into a top-down managed grid to keep the lights on, right? And that transition happened really quickly. And that's how the grid basically works today. To oversimplify it, we designed a system that assumed demand for electricity was relatively uncontrollable. People were just going to flip the lights on whenever they wanted. You can't store electricity was one of the premises of the grid. And with those premises there, we plunked down these huge thermal power plants running on coal, running on natural gas, in some cases hydro. And that resulted in a lot of these different utilities that are regulated, controlling the power output of those power plants to balance the amount of power coming through the grid to what we're using at home. And it's all about keeping that balance. Again, I'm dramatically generalizing here, but
absolutely.
Really that top-down kind of hierarchy, it's different in every different state in the US, it's different in every country in the planet, but generally speaking, that's kind of the compact that we entered into for keeping the lights on. The big thing that's changing right now is that you and me and everybody listening to this are becoming the primary investors in the grid. The previous model, it was, again, these huge companies dumping a lot of capital into the wires and the power plants to keep the lights on. But now corporations are buying solar all over the place. Governments are regulating huge installations of wind energy and other renewable energy facilities. Electric vehicles are skyrocketing in adoption in a lot of different markets and everywhere. Rooftop solar, batteries, all these cool new technologies. When you sum them all up, those things are what's going to balance the grid, not these big thermal power plants. Imagine if millions of different batteries are networked together using blockchain technology and other digital technologies, we can actually orchestrate those to help balance the grid instead of that big, dirty thermal power plant. That's the transition we're undergoing. And Energy Web is zoomed right in on that, basically saying, again, my previous statement, these companies that have run the grid for the past 100 years, they have no idea how to orchestrate a system that looks like that with billions of endpoints. That's where we come in. Basically say, we're going to layer open source digital technology across all of those assets to give the utilities a way to manage this increasingly distributed, low carbon, decentralized system.
Yeah, what I love about you guys, in great summary there, I appreciate the run up as we get into Energy Web here. What I love about you guys is it looks like you are actually landing the partnerships. You're landing the right companies to bring into this kind of enterprise level initiative, enterprise level platform, because let's face it, 2017, I do remember seeing a lot of projects that were saying, hey, the same exact thing as you're saying right now, but the problem is they didn't back it up with talk, as is most of the ICOs that existed in that time.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of air quote energy blockchain projects. 90% of them were marketing. And like the whole market was incredibly frothy at that time. It wasn't just energy, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a lot going on. I think for us, when we started Energy Web, we said we're not going to do this unless we can talk 10 energy companies into supporting our vision. So there was no ICO, right? It was just saying, what big energy companies and power companies from around the world can we get to support us to build this open source digital infrastructure layer? So that was the genesis. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that genesis, but I think there is a awesome question here in the chat that kind of leads us up into that conversation. So basically, what are you guys doing at Energy Web Foundation, Energy Web? And then the question is, what is being built on the EW stack by these utilities?
Yeah, great question. 2 years ago, my answer to that would have been, we're building a bunch of different use cases focused on basically helping these businesses unlock value in a lot of different ways. To be a little bit more boring, we build two things, literally two things on top of this Energy Web stack. And I think people kind of fall asleep when you hear that, because crypto is all about innovation and building lots of things. If we crack these two things, we will fundamentally transform the way energy systems work around the world. So the first thing is giving electricity storing, producing or using assets, a digital identity, to make it really easy for those assets to balance the grid. Kind of a boring, dry description, but it's literally Uberizing or Airbnb-ing every single electric device on the planet. If my car can talk in real time with the utility, with IoT sensors on my distribution network, and with the regulator, that thing can now be trusted and be used to balance the grid. And so with a lot of the project announcements you see, whether it's the work we've been doing with the German government, with the energy agency in Germany, whether it's the work we're doing with distribution utilities in Spain, with grid operators in the US, it looks a little bit different from the press releases and everything we put out. But when you cut through it at the end of the day, that's our killer application, is just giving all of these assets an identity so that they can seamlessly participate in energy markets. The other one is less about identity and more about traceability. And this brings us to the Bitcoin piece. When you go out and buy renewables right now, it's an incredibly archaic analog system. You call an intermediary and you say, I want to buy renewables. That intermediary has a spreadsheet of a bunch of assets, and it's almost like crypto. You know, if you look at Tether, I like to use the Tether example. So Tether basically says, we're going to give you USDT, trust us. Here's this big basket of stuff behind it. Yeah, we'll tell you a little bit of information about it. That's kind of how renewable energy purchasing works right now. The other side of the energy web shop is transforming that entire system. We make it possible for renewable energy buyers to be able to cite and basically say, I'm purchasing renewables from that solar system in this part of the world with the following attributes, and I can tell you, no BS, I own the output from that renewable energy facility because everything's happening on a blockchain. So it's impossible to double count. So those are the two with every single utility you see out there that we're working with. We're working on one or two of those applications, one or two of those use cases. And even if I look forward into the future, Energy Web Stack can support a lot of use cases in a lot of different industries and stuff because of the technology we're building. But just in energy, right, our mission's about decarbonization. And if we crack both of those nuts, giving every asset an identity, totally changing the way that people buy renewables, we will have dramatically changed the way energy markets work around the world.
Yeah, when you talk about people buying renewables, is this primarily an enterprise-based system or actual like people, retail on the ground individuals looking to buy renewables? Because I do want to get into this convo of how do you create a community around something that is primarily enterprise driven?
Yeah, all of the above. So, I mean, just to really bring clarity to it, the entire Energy Web Stack is totally open source. There's no weird licensing stuff. It's not a private blockchain that's used at the bottom. Energy Web Chain is a totally public chain. The only thing that's different is that these energy companies and startups in our ecosystem host the validator or authority nodes on it. But it's a totally open system. The way that I think we go about, well, actually, let me step back too, just talk crypto for a second. Our stack is absolutely facilitating purchases of renewables by retail people. It's not just enterprises. One of the things we're trying to do under the Crypto Climate Accord to bring it back to crypto is imagine you have a wallet or you have an exchange that you're transacting across. We want to make it possible, and we're going to make it possible for retail users of those platforms to kind of top up the transaction fee for their purchase of crypto. And that top up is going to dump some value into another account that will trigger a purchase of renewables. It's basically making your crypto clean. So that on the back end, that all happens on the Energy Web Stack. But at the end of the day, Jesse goes to buy some Bitcoin. A little bit of incremental value is used for that Bitcoin purchase to buy some renewable energy on the other side of it, to basically make that crypto clean. So yeah, the solutions we're building touch end users and people. All of these identities that I talked about, they're ours, they're not the utilities. But because the energy markets are wildly regulated, the path to changing that entire system is about working with the utilities, not ignoring them. You can't. It's just impossible.
Yeah, a lot of the projects we have on this channel are just, it's really obvious where the community comes in, but you guys are trying to bridge that, right? Be able to work with the utilities and also kind of bring that back to value for token holders and things like that. So I'm following it. I do want to continue to kind of break it down here. So we have the EWT token. We have community members that are interested outside of enterprises that are interested in coming in and be validators. What is the role of a community member? What is the role of a EWT holder in this ecosystem that you're building?
So we just announced a very, very direct way for any Energy Web token holder on the planet to accelerate our mission and participate. And that's through our staking model that a lot of documentation has been released, and we're going to bring it into life this summer. But the way the staking model works is from a user perspective, be very similar to if anybody staked tokens in any other kind of projects, whether it's through an exchange or another path. The business logic for staking in our ecosystem, not to pick a fight, but it actually makes sense. So basically what we've done is in order for all this stuff that I'm talking about to take place, give every single asset an identity, enable companies to purchase renewables anywhere in the world. A lot of tech gets used to facilitate all of that. You need the blockchain. You need a way for all these devices to send messages to each other in a secure way. You need data to be stored. You basically need what I would call a bunch of relatively boring back-end cloud services to be delivered. So what we're doing, and this is where the community comes in, is standing up what we call the utility layer of our stack. Basically, anyone that goes through a simple KYC process is going to be able to come in here, set up what's called a utility node. That node is actually going to send cloud services to our grid operators and businesses in our ecosystem that are running all these applications. In order to set up a utility node, you got to stake tokens. You don't have the tokens to stake, flip to the community, and you can accept contributions from the community in. So it's almost like delegated proof of stake. We use this language of providers and patrons. So if you're hosting one of these nodes, you're a provider of services to all these utilities we work with. If you're a patron, you're putting your tokens into that provider account, and you're earning a return on those tokens that comes from the Energy Web token pool. So it's a staking model that anybody can participate in. So to directly answer your question, that's how we've configured it for the community. But the business reason, it's not staking just for staking's sake. It's staking because these nodes are providing mission critical services to the regulated entities that we participate with. And if that node goes down or is hacked or something like that, there's a slashing mechanism. So some of those tokens are taken out. So anyway, there's a lot of detail on the staking model and everything, but that's been our primary development for the past quarter that we're working on.
Yeah, I want to touch on this EW here, Energy Web decentralized operating system. I've got the actual website pulled up, and if you can remember from just the top of your brain here, I've got the overview and I've got the applications drop down here. So I'm going to touch on the overview here first. I'm going to kind of give people a run through. Is there anything you want to talk about as it relates to this EW page, as well as the tools, which are the Energy Web Switchboard and Energy Web Zero? You got a large umbrella here, so just kind of a general breakdown would be awesome.
We do have a large umbrella. I can riff through it pretty quick if I just look at the different modules that are on the website. I would say we're currently we're undergoing a very large brand redesign to actually tell our story much more simply, so it don't have to take a podcast to explain everything that's going on here. But looking at that, EW DOS, we don't just talk about blockchain anymore, because for us, we pair blockchain with other technologies to pull off everything I'm describing. And so that stack we call the Energy Web Decentralized Operating System. The Energy Web chain is at the core of it. And the other piece of tech that I'll talk about if you're looking at that dropdown is probably this thing called Switchboard. I think that's the most important thing that people should understand, because this is actually where staking is going to come in too. Switchboard is an identity access and management system. So when your car has a digital identity, when you as a customer have an identity, when a battery has an identity, Switchboard is the tool that we give to application builders to be able to set all the permissions and toggles around those identities. What needs to be true for me to trust that Jesse is who he says he is? What needs to be true for Jesse's electric car to be able to participate in the market? So Switchboard is our mission critical infrastructure piece of software that frankly is used for every single application I talk about. That's really the core of Energy Web. as you start stepping away from switchboard, you start having all of these other technologies that are a little bit more at the application layer. Zero and Origin, there are two that are on the website, really simple. That's everything I was talking about with renewables. Zero is the way for buyers to go and find renewables around the world. Origin is the way for power companies who have wind and solar facilities to hook in to the tech stack so they can sell renewables, really simply described. Energy Web Chain, I think we talked about, that's the other kind of technology component. And then Energy Web Flex is a little bit different. It's just a bit of business logic that's open source to provide markets for things like electric vehicles to participate in the energy system. So a little bit more of an application than infrastructure. So those are kind of that's the quick rundown of the tech stack. The thing I would probably call attention to, and I actually don't know exactly where it is on the website right now, but if people are looking, what I just described, what's missing in that description is this utility layer. The utility layer, again, are these back-end, largely cloud services that every single one of these applications needs. What we're trying to do at Energy Web is make it so that a utility doesn't have to lock into a 4-year contract with Microsoft or Google for those cloud services. What if they could procure them in near real time from a decentralized set of these utility nodes that are secured with a staking model? That's the other piece that I didn't describe.
Got it. Okay, so you mentioned that all of these utilities, these companies, these enterprises, they're all kind of stuck in the Mesozoic area, like just era or whatever, really just behind the times, essentially. How do you go about reaching out to these guys and saying, hey, this is what you need to be a part of, this will help you be more efficient? How do you have that conversation now that you're a part of Energy Web? And what does that process looks like? I know you guys are working with Volkswagen. That's something I'm super interested in that jumped off the page. So what does that process look like, and how do you go about starting and initiating that conversation?
3 years ago, it was a couple people sitting in the equivalent of a garage with a cold list and calling every single energy company we knew and pitching them on all this crazy stuff. Where it's evolved now is the model's flipped, and these companies are calling us. The only reason we've gotten there is because this core set of about 150 energy companies we've been working with since late 2016, we've proven the value with them. We've proven that you can give a digital identity to these assets and you can trust them. We've proven that there's a strong business case. And so what happens now, just in terms of the first part of your question with introductions, these people all talk to each other. Executives at these utilities talk to each other and look at who's doing what. So when we're able to put out an announcement about a grid operator in one part of the world doing something very specific, that doesn't go unnoticed. So we had an initial Rolodex as a simple way to put it, but now we have this network of companies who all talk to each other. And that's kind of our growth model and how it continues to grow. You know, what does that look like? On a day-to-day basis, it's all about trying to help. It's not a crypto conversation, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. It's more of an enterprise, serious kind of business conversation, which is, I'm going to talk to you about this digital infrastructure that if you deploy it, will support your business for the next 20 years. And then you have to start talking about blockchain and digital identities and all this stuff. But the point, it's not about crypto. It's not about blockchain. That's even why some of our marketing, you don't see us leading with blockchain. It's because with these communities, these decision makers and these companies, we're just trying to help them understand the foundational business case. Once that's clear, we talk about blockchain and everything else.
I love this combination of enterprise level kind of actions or business development, and then having the community alongside of it where you have the energy web chain, because what we were talking about before the episode, CarbonSwap is an awesome piece that's been added now to your community, and I want to get into that. Guys that are in the chat, we have about 53 people listening and watching right now, so appreciate you guys dropping the questions. We'll get it to Jesse, but take me through the community development that's happening on the chain that we can kind of hit, specifically CarbonSwap.
Yeah, so seeing CarbonSwap was incredibly exciting. You know, as you've probably seen, you know, a lot of these companies that I've been referencing are building solutions with our help. As you said, these companies, they don't have a lot of internal development capacity. That is slowly changing, but we basically have to do a lot of direct development support with them. So anytime we see an independent group of people build something new on the stack, that's incredibly exciting. So to see CarbonSwap come on, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but to see, especially before the Elon tweets, how much value was locked on CarbonSwap, incredibly exciting. It's a decentralized exchange. There's a bunch of different token pairs on there. If anyone's interacted with Uni or some of these other dexes, it look and feel very similar. But I think the team that built it made a good decision in calling it CarbonSwap, because it's a DEX running on the Energy Web chain. It's a super efficient chain. It's 100% renewable. Transaction costs are super low because of the architecture of the Energy Web chain. So yeah, we were really excited to see that come to life. And actually, we have all kinds of ideas how to use it from the EWF side now that it's there. We want to create pools. For example, imagine an Energy Web token renewable energy pool, where basically you'd be able to go in and buy renewables from a specific part of the world via that pool. So we're actually looking at building that as part of some of the Crypto Climate Accord work right now. But it's really exciting.
Yeah, I've got the CarbonSwap.exchange website up now. Definitely looks similar to Uni. I didn't see the analytics part, but I'm sure that's super interesting to follow, as you were saying. Part of me, so I really want to break down the Energy Web chain as it is, as a blockchain, right? It's a layer one solution. It's your own blockchain. Is there a part of you that thinks, okay, we've created this really scalable blockchain here where it's not, and by the way, carbon emissions super low as you guys are attacking that directly. Is there a part of you that says we could turn Energy Web chain into a competitor with the likes of Binance Smart Chain, likes of Polygon, the likes of all these others, like Polkadot and things like that? Definitely.
Yes, I mean, the benefits that I just talked through, even for using CarbonSwap as an example, those would transfer to other industries. So our focus has been on just transforming energy with the Energy Web stack. But I do know that forget Energy Web Foundation as an organization. Currently, there are other companies in the ecosystem pitching hard to get other verticals onto the Energy Web stack. Telco is a really good example. And I'd say it goes well beyond the chain. I'm probably not explaining it as clearly as I could be, but this cloud services thing, I mean, just to come back to that for a second, because if we crack that's transformative for basically any technology intense industry in the world. Right now, you have businesses that enter into multi-year service level agreements with cloud service providers. Those agreements are not fun. You're locked in, you have typically not very good price terms, and you bear a lot of the risk for those contracts. If we're successful and we have billions of devices out there, those are not good contracts to be locked into. And so with this utility layer example, we're literally trying to create a wholesale market for these cloud services so that a company can come in and procure services in close to real time as they need them, instead of getting sucked into these long-term contracts. And by the way, the way we're doing it is applying blockchain consensus, not to block validation, but to service provision. We're building something that's called a watchtower right now at this utility layer. I like to think of it like the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings. And these watchtowers are going to be looking at the different utility nodes and checking that the service levels of those utility nodes is high or low. So it's the same concept as nodes in a blockchain checking that everything is correct at the blockchain layer, and we're applying it at this utility layer. So I just offer that to say, if we crack that nut, that is something that's interesting to every industry that is using cloud services.
This is a fascinating discussion. A lot of cool comments coming through from the perspective of the user, right? The community member. Is there an ability to... I don't want to get too far into that. Freedom is saying smart grid where your electric vehicle starts generating money. Is that a potential use case here that we can see going forward?
So I guess I should have made that more explicit. If Energy Web is successful, I'll take an electric car. Yeah, a cool F-150 that just came out, the one that Biden was spotted flooring across the tarmac. Yeah, if you have one of those and we're successful, every time you plug it in, you should be able to make some money. Now that made money might be like you're paying a little bit less to charge the thing, but that's in the back end. That's exactly what we're trying to facilitate with Energy Web. Is we provide all of the back end infrastructure for that trust to be there between the car and the utility, and that will enable them to channel some value to your car to balance the grid instead of that power plant. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
And does that look like a USD payment to someone's account, or is that an EWT payment? What does that look like?
So there's no prescribed solution. I mean, the way it works now, R3 is one of the partners in the Energy Web ecosystem. And what we did with them is said, we want to facilitate this value transfer using tokens in the back end, but it needs to show up as a bill credit in a traditional billing system managed by Oracle, because that's what these utilities use now. So that's the solution we architected with them. It shows up as just your bill. A lot of different market operators are talking about using EWT as the payment for these kinds of things, specifically in emerging economies. I've had some really interesting conversations about our stack being used for the use cases I described in places with really low immature electric grids with not a lot of electricity there. And in those cases, there is no financial infrastructure in place to facilitate payments from mobile users that charge their phone. Why not use crypto? So I'm based on just my view of these projects around the world, I've seen people experimenting with EWT for bill settlement, fiat, stable coins. I mean, you name it.
Yeah, I want to get into some more comments here because you got an awesome community that's joined us for sure. Kobar is saying a lot of projects need a messaging component to interact asset to asset. Example, local energy communities, share your solar microgrid with others, for example. So is that...
So let's just tie a thread because I know there's a lot of content here. The messaging service that we're building is a decentralized service, and it's one of those cloud services. So again, if you have a microgrid or you have an entire distribution network with billions of IoT devices on there, would you rather, and you're the utility responsible for implementing this Energy Web application, would you rather procure that messaging service from a globally decentralized group of nodes that are incredibly high, reliable uptime, low cost, or would you rather sign a 4-year contract with Google? I can tell you the answer I would choose, right? And that's what we're trying to build with this utility layer. So messaging that Kobar just mentioned, that's one of the most important of these cloud services.
Yeah, speaking of Google, you guys got that $1 million funding. You're doing the Crypto Climate Accord here. I kind of want to jump into that really quick. Guys, awesome questions. Keep them rolling as we make our way towards the end of the episode, but we still have some good questions to come. So Crypto Climate Accord, that $1 million that you got in grant funding from Google, that take me through both of those things and how they're coming, man. They sound like awesome kind of initiatives there.
Let me just attack them, and I'll tie them back to the top of the episode where I said what applications we're building, because there's really two, right? So the Google grant, I guess I shouldn't be throwing Google cloud services under the bus. Yeah. So the grant in partnership with Google.org and Climate Kick is a European-focused grant, and I'll tie it directly to that identity application. We pitched them and basically said, we have built this technology that enables any of these devices to participate in energy markets. Our next step on the roadmap is to bring that tech to as many grid operators in the world as possible. And that grant program was running, basically saying they want to help companies that are focused specifically in Western Europe. So now that grant is focused on partnering with Google to get as many Western European grid operators on board with our stack as possible. This is the simplest way I can describe it. And that's exactly what we pitched them. And we'll be putting out more announcements about that partnership and our go-to-market for that. But that's the detail to tie it right back to the identity piece. Yeah.
Awesome. And the Climate Accord?
So the Climate Accord is more on the traceability side. And I already spoke a little bit about the background of the Climate Accord, but let's just tie everything together with the Elon and Saylor tweets.
Yeah, let's go back. Love it.
So they... My read of it, and maybe if you have a take, let me know, because I haven't followed it as closely as I have in the past 12 hours. It looks like they're trying to get this council of Bitcoin miners together to basically be more, the only language I saw is be more transparent about their greenness. Yeah. So 2 of the miners that were mentioned in there, Argo and Hut 8, are supporters of the Crypto Climate Accord. So we've been working with them. And I have to imagine 1 + 1 = 2 here. Because we weren't in the conversation that Saylor and Musk were tweeting about. But what we've been pitching is this concept of a green hash rate. Everything I just described about the Energy Web stack, imagine applying it to a Bitcoin mine. So an ASIC at the most bottom level gets digital identity. That digital identity tells us where that mine is, how much electricity it's using, what its contribution to the hash rate is. If we know those 3 things, and by the way, we can know all those 3 things while protecting the privacy of that miner, because we don't want to leak any proprietary information. If we know those 3 things, I said this on an interview yesterday, don't trust, verify. We can know the green hash rate of the entire global Bitcoin network. So my push to that group, if they're out there, is don't do some sort of self-reporting. Oh, we're all miners. We promise we're using this much.
Yeah.
Work with us, because our tech stack is configured exactly this. And it's what we've been discussing with companies under the Crypto Climate Accord, is to bring real-time transparency as to the carbon intensity of the Bitcoin network.
Yeah, I'm glad we're back on this subject because we have way more people here. We have about 72 people watching and listening right now. And we talked to Elon, we talked Saylor early in the episode, but I'm sure they didn't catch it. How do you enforce something like this? And what does that like climate look like now? I keep using the word climate. It's not a pun, I promise. What does that climate look like now with those geographic borders, right? You have miners in all of these different areas. We know about the kind of like allocation or isolation, the large mining influence that exists in China, but a lot of that is moving to the U.S. We see all that stuff now. You're way more, in my opinion, into this type of information and analytics and data. What does that climate look like now with people coming on board in kind of self-reporting this stuff?
I'm just so not a fan of survey-based self-reporting. It's like using SurveyMonkey to say how much renewable electricity you're using as a Bitcoin miner. What is your incentive to be honest in that survey?
So there's no actual like analytics out there besides self-reporting out there right now as it was.
Not for, I mean, even for electricity consumption. The Bitcoin, so Cambridge has this thing called I'm going to mess up the acronym, but it's the Bitcoin Energy Consumption Index. That's the one everybody cites to say, here's how much electricity the Bitcoin network's using. So that's just, that's an estimate. It's not real, right? How much carbon is currently in the Bitcoin network? That's just an estimate. It's not real. It's all survey data based on analyses, yeah? Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to say is like, we can fix that. We can go directly to these mining rigs and set up different trust architectures to collect in near real time how much electricity those different ASICs are using. And then it's really not rocket science to figure out how dirty the grid is in those different places. If you have those two things together, I mean, imagine in addition to the Bitcoin price over time and the hash rate, those are the two things we track now, there could be a third one that basically just says what % green is the entire Bitcoin network.
How does that not exist today? That blows my mind that we're not accurately tracking this. I had no idea that was an estimation.
Well, how many, when was this in the public's eye?
Yeah.
No. I was running around a year ago, and so were a bunch of other people at Energy Web saying, hey, we should probably fix this Bitcoin green energy thing, or institutional investors are going to stop buying. Now, everybody's paying attention to that, so I think everybody recognizes that it's something to be solved.
Yeah, I want to touch on this one last time here because I definitely have talked with multiple people who are looking to get into Bitcoin. My girlfriend's father is definitely one who has been silently on the outside, maybe not so silently because he sends me all these links about maybe a hack or something that has to now do with renewable energy. Is that a problem as it exists today in the same realm that Elon is trying to put it? Is renewable energy a problem right now for Bitcoin? I know we touched on it earlier, but just in general, is that a huge problem for us right now?
The carbon intensity of the Bitcoin network is a problem, but bold, underline, italicize, it's the same problem faced by dozens of other industries in the world.
Got it.
We need to decarbonize planes. We need to decarbonize the whole electric grid. We need to decarbonize the way that we move from point A to point B. I think everybody agrees, well, not everybody, many more people and companies and governments around the world agree with those statements. The same applies to Bitcoin, right? And so what I say is let's fix it for Bitcoin and we can show these other industries how to do it.
That's great, man. That's great. Keep the questions coming. This has been a phenomenal conversation. So I guess as it relates to the Crypto Climate Accord here, are there conversations? Are you guys sliding into Elon's DMs, trying to figure out how we can get maybe Tesla into this conversation or get them into this convo?
Every day, man. Every day, it's pitching. What's the different, and not just Tesla, right? But all of these different outsized influencers on the crypto markets, right? my message to them again is that this is a totally solvable problem. Yes, crypto is being somewhat unfairly treated relative to the other industries I just mentioned. But the one thing I worry about is I see this Bitcoin mining council. I'm not worried about centralized decision making in an OPEC for Bitcoin. I know that came up out of nowhere really quickly. I'm just worried, like, let's solve this with a decentralized digital open source solution. Those three things are in crypto's core, right? Decentralized, digital, open source. Let's apply that to solving the Bitcoin carbon problem, and we won't be talking about this even 3 years from now. Let's just solve it and move on. There's a lot of other stuff we got to deal with.
So basically what you're saying is you should solve it with an IoT solution as opposed to saying, hey, let's get the council together and let's handshake on all of this stuff.
Exactly. Those handshakes got to happen. Bitcoin miners are probably going to need to agree upon, like, the standards and what needs to be true in order to trust that data is coming from X, Y, and Z. That's all human business things that need to happen. So and that's going to be challenging. Getting some Chinese Bitcoin miners into a room together to agree to be able to download a piece of open source software that's reporting some of this, that's going to be hard, right? We have the tech to do it, though. We absolutely have the tech to do it. And if some of these leaders step forward, we can lick this thing.
Absolutely. Guys, we're having a fantastic conversation here with Jesse Morse, co-founder of the Energy Web token, Energy Web Foundation. Just you guys are tackling so much here. So drop your last questions in the chat. We are coming up to the end of the episode here. We've been going almost an hour, so I definitely want to let Jesse get up out of here. You mentioned solar as the answer. But I know a lot of people have certain thoughts on nuclear. Is nuclear a potential piece? It's saying it out loud. It sounds a little bit hard to do on a person to person basis, as opposed to kind of just throwing up something on my house that gets the solar energy. But maybe I answered my own question. I don't know. You school me.
It's kind of a personal political question. For me, I'm interested in making the grid and the global energy system as decarbonized as quickly as possible. So when I think about shuttering these existing nuclear facilities, there's a lot of good reasons to do that, right? I mean, nuclear energy is wildly expensive. Solar and wind is way cheaper. But there's an operational reality to the fact that we have these huge power plants out there pumping out carbon-free electricity. So I personally am not a huge advocate of like early closure of these nuke facilities. I'm also not an advocate of any new ones, though. We don't need it. Solar and wind, cheapest energy around the world, and it's distributed. Nuke power plants are a huge cybersecurity risk. So if we have all of these solar systems, wind farms, batteries balancing the grid in a more distributed, decentralized manner, it's a much more secure physical grid infrastructure.
Awesome. All right, we have two questions here. One from Rupelius. He is saying, do you want to decarb other cryptocurrencies, and how would this look? Yes.
In October last year, we did this for the XRP ledger. We basically used the Energy Web stack, in particular Zero, to purchase a bunch of renewable energy certificates from different places around the world that effectively offset is the way to talk about it. It's not a carbon offset or anything. And carbon offsets are kind of dirty language in sustainability world, but basically we just purchased enough renewables to make the carbon contribution of the XRP ledger zero. And yes, some of the other signatories of the Crypto Climate Accord, Web3 Foundation, Consensus, these other organizations that represent non-Bitcoin ecosystems, we're trying to do the same thing with them. We're actually trying to do retroactive decarbonization. What if you could go back in time to the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper and purchase enough renewables to basically offset your historical emissions? Companies like Google and Microsoft are doing this now just for their own operations. Some of these crypto ecosystems want to do the same thing. It's not even our idea.
Yeah. Kind of school me here, and pardon my ignorance, but when you say purchase enough renewables to cancel that out, what do you physically mean by that statement? What?
Three different kinds of products that you can purchase to achieve that, right? Product one is I'm literally going to sign a contract that means a new renewable energy facility gets built that otherwise wouldn't have gotten built. Okay. So like solar or wind, or I'm signing a contract that I'm getting all the electricity from that asset. Another product is, and sorry, this is like a little energy wonkery, but it's important because Bitcoin's in the news right now. The other way that most renewable energy purchasing takes place today is you purchase what are called certificates. So basically these are, you can think of them like tokens on top of a unit of electricity that represents the ownership of that unit of electricity. And so you can buy those, which for a lot of companies isn't as good because you're not buying the electricity and the certificate, but not everybody can invest in a renewable energy facility. So that's an option. And then the third one that everybody talks about is like, I just want to spend a bunch of money and plant trees, or I want to spend a bunch of money and sink carbon into the ground, which is really cool. And I call this the negative emissions industry, or the carbon dioxide reduction kind of industry. But it's not scaled. That industry is very small. It's not very trustworthy yet. So we'd like to change that. But those are the kind of 3 different products that I'm referencing. Yeah.
Awesome. Man, this has been one of the best Layer 1 podcast episodes. From your answers, from the conversation to the chat. We have Jason Moffat in the chat saying, I'm going Luddite. I'm going to go 3/4 Amish, going to get my field oxen to mine my crypto. So I'm sure you're a big fan of that one. But
Nice.
yeah, I think we're pretty much at the end here. I would love for you to hit on anything else that we've kind of missed with the Energy Web Foundation. Holds Bags is probably one of your, more in... You're one of your community members that is strongly enthusiastic here. He's saying, Jesse, is there any link between the utility layer and low orbit satellites?
Ooh, not yet. But whoever suggested that, reach out to me and let's make it happen. That's a brilliant idea. Yep, that's a brilliant idea given the global nature of what we're trying to do. I think I'd leave it with is awesome discussion. I think you hit all the right questions. And the only thing I'd leave with the audience is anytime, Energy Web is a different kind of project relative to a lot of the other crypto projects, because at our core, we believe that if we can convince these enterprises to change the tools and technologies that they're using, we will achieve the kind of impact we're trying to create on the planet. And the community, the broader Energy Web community absolutely has a role to play there. But that's why you see it in a lot of our communications. We're focused on enterprises because that's the biggest key to our success, is how many of these enterprises can we get building on this stack.
Jesse, I'm glad you're leading this movement, man. We're happy to have you, and I think that this is what needs to happen. You need someone that's really able to explain it both, in a very clear and broad vision, as well as get down to the details. So really, really awesome to see the work that you're doing, man. I'm super excited for you. Okay, guys, we are getting up out of here. Book recommendation question. I always throw it at the end of the episode. It could be crypto, non-crypto, renewable energy, maybe. I don't know. But any type of book recommendation you got right now?
Yes, I'll tie everything we just talked about together. Any sci-fi nerds out there, Kim Stanley Robinson recently wrote a book called Ministry for the Future. There is a standalone chapter on blockchain written from first person. There is a global carbon coin, and it is awesome. So anybody interested in the confluence of crypto, blockchain, and climate, check out Kim Stanley Robinson, Ministry for the Future.
Awesome answer. Guys, Jesse Morris, co-founder of Energy Web. We're excited for what you guys have coming, man, and really, really happy to have you here. Thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you.